Hello, Eddie. It's my pleasure to welcome Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, to Arkansas and to the Governor's Mansion today. And I appreciate Senator Cotton having a number of different working groups this morning for General Barr, and being joined also today, of course, by Congressman French Hill. We just concluded a working lunch with the Attorney General, with representatives of the law enforcement community, but also we had a broad-ranging discussion that included a number of topics, and I was pleased to have Secretary Cook here that was able to brief the Attorney General on our task force on the future of law enforcement. That is critical as we set the stage for the next legislative session and any changes that need to be made. We also had a discussion about, with Secretary Nate Smith being here, on the coronavirus here in Arkansas. And yes, I did raise with the Attorney General in that discussion my request to the White House and discussions on utilization of the Defense Production Act to help us in the national supply chain for our testing that is so critical to us in Arkansas and across the nation. And then finally, before I turn it over to the Attorney General, I want to express my appreciation to him for listening to us and giving full consideration to the case that was decided by Judge Boasberg that involves our work requirement here in Arkansas, that gives us the flexibility to have a work requirement for those that are on the expanded Medicaid here in this state. Judge Boasberg struck that down. It's on appeal, and currently we're waiting a decision by the Department of Justice on whether they will file a petition for writ of certiorari so this case can be considered by the United States Supreme Court. The Attorney General, I want to express my thanks to you for indicating that the Department of Justice will be filing that petition for writ of certiorari that will support our case here in Arkansas and give the United States Supreme Court an opportunity for review of that. I've known the Attorney General for many years, well over a decade, and I appreciated his service in the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush, but now serving this president in one of the most critical positions in this administration. And I'm a fan of the Department of Justice and very, very grateful for his leadership. Attorney General William Barr.
Thank you, Governor. It was great to spend time with you at lunch today and with your team covering a range of issues, and I really appreciate the time that you spent with us. I also appreciate the invitation to come here to Arkansas from my good friend Senator Tom Cotton. He's arranged some very useful meetings for me, both with law enforcement and with the business community down here. And also it has been a pleasure to catch up with my friend Congressman Hill, who served with me in the administration of President H.W. Bush. This morning, I had the privilege of meeting with a broad array of state, local, and federal law enforcement officials and officers who are here in Arkansas. And what struck me is the strength of the relationship that they have, the cooperation that exists, and also really the very high caliber of the Arkansas law enforcement community. Many of the practices and proposals that are being made today out in the public debate are in fact here in place already in Arkansas. Now, I've often said that being a member of law enforcement is the toughest job in the United States, and I still believe that, and it's certainly become a lot tougher after that ghastly event in Minneapolis. We have a lot of challenges. The President has issued an executive order calling for certain reforms, and I discussed that with the members of the law enforcement community here. And also was delighted to hear about the task force on advancing law enforcement that has been established here that is covering many of the same issues that we're wrestling with. So I look forward to the process of working closely with Arkansas law enforcement leadership on that. So with those initial comments, I'm glad to throw it open to any questions you may have, I guess, for any of us up here. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator. Okay, yeah. All right.
Thank you. I also want to thank the Attorney General for taking time out of his very busy schedule to visit our state. I also want to thank the Attorney General and the entire Department of Justice for what they do to help combat violent crime. We have our U.S. Attorney Cody Highland here, and the U.S. Attorney working in conjunction with other federal agencies like the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, and other federal law enforcement agencies, as well as our sheriff's departments and our police departments, have put so many hardened repeat criminals behind bars over these last 3 years by taking advantages of some of the stiffer penalties that we have in our federal system to prosecute cases there, to get people who are serious threats to public safety in prison for an extended period of time, whereas they might not go to prison in the state system, or they might be released very early. And it's because of the leadership of the Attorney General and the leadership we have here through Cody Highlands, our U.S. Attorney, that Arkansas is becoming a safer place. And finally, I just want to thank the Attorney General for the words of encouragement he gave this morning to all of those law enforcement officers, the police chiefs, the sheriffs, the state troopers, so many other law enforcement officials we had. As the Attorney General said, it can seem like a tough time right now in law enforcement. After the horrific killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, we saw protests and demonstrations that then got infiltrated and hijacked by violent agitators, in some cases violent insurrectionists. And that led to some widespread condemnations of the police. However, we know that our police live among us, they work among us, they worship with us, their kids play with us, and they are dedicated to public safety. There's no one who wants a strong police force that acts with integrity and honor more so than all of those officers who are out keeping our streets safe. And while right now it can seem like a challenging time, I just want to say to all of our peace officers, we appreciate you, we respect you, we depend on you, and that's the exact message the Attorney General delivered to them this morning as well.
Well, let me add my thanks to my friend of longstanding, Bill Barr, for coming to Arkansas. Thanks, Senator Cotton, for bringing a member of the President's Cabinet here to talk about the important issues around law and order. We had a superb visit today with members of the law enforcement community, and we reiterated our support of them and their very, very difficult job. I'm also pleased to have worked with Senator Cotton on the issue of fentanyl and getting fentanyl off our streets. We had an excellent presentation today from our senior special agent in charge of the DEA here, who talked about the cooperation that he has, undermanned as he might be, in working with state and local government here to keep drugs off our streets. We also had a discussion with those law enforcement officers about the need for more guidance from the federal government on the CARES Act funding that's come to our states, where more guidance can be given to our governors, and we hope we can do that legislatively, that money can be spent in support of law enforcement during this time of uncertainty with COVID. And finally, I would say that it was good to brag about Arkansas in front of the Attorney General. As the Attorney General said, many of the best practices that are being talked about in the country on better community policing are practiced right here in Arkansas through department certification, officer certification, and training. The good work that Governor Hutchinson has done on our crisis stabilization units, which has been a recommendation from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, that we try to take those that have a health or behavioral health need and get them off the street, not by putting them in jail, but by getting them medical treatment. And there's no better example of that than the work here that Catherine Griffin and Governor Hutchinson are doing in 4 different locations, where nearly 4,000 Arkansans over the last year have been benefited by treatment rather than being just locked up in jail when they have a behavioral health challenge. Excellent discussion, and again, my thanks to the Attorney General for being in Arkansas.
Well, obviously, we were disappointed in the decision to the extent it did not accept our argument, the government's argument about the extent of the president's immunity. But as a practical matter, the decision made very clear that a president just is not at the mercy of litigants and investigators, and that there are protections and defenses that can be raised. So the case has now been remanded to the lower court, where some of the issues will be addressed. Yes? Yes, the investigations are going to take the time that is necessary to do a thorough and good investigation, but I'm still hopeful that sometime around the end of the summer we'll see some developments.
I guess what was your biggest takeaway from this discussion this morning, and then you can also go to the delegation.
Well, as the Senator said, I think the current environment can be very demoralizing for law enforcement. Even before Minneapolis, as I said, we were concerned about the sustainability of our law enforcement system in the United States in a full employment economy. Attracting quality people and retaining them has become increasingly difficult. Many agencies are substantially below strength. And we were wrestling with those issues before Minneapolis. And I think the current environment where some, we don't think the majority of Americans by any means, but some are trying to demonize police, exacerbates that dynamic. And so I think we all agreed that now is not the time, obviously, to defund the police, to weaken law enforcement. It's the time actually to do exactly what Arkansas is doing right now. Look forward as to how we maintain the most professional and effective law enforcement that our people deserve, and invest what is necessary to do that. Many of the things that are being proposed nowadays, increased training, for example, require funding. And so to improve, our law enforcement, I think, generally in this country is world class. I mean, it's thoroughly professional. And it's gone through decades of progress and reform, and it is still doing that, and there's obviously room for improvement. But we have to keep that forward momentum, and I think the idea of tearing down these institutions is obviously very dangerous, and we're seeing the results of it with the increase in violence in many of our cities. Well, I really can't comment on the specifics of the Little Rock situation. I don't know enough about the dynamics right now in that police department. But having strong partners at the state level and the local level is critical for the Department of Justice. We depend on it. 80% of law enforcement officers in the country are state and local. And so we are interested in having the strongest possible partners in every city, in every community. Now, I think it was just yesterday we announced our findings in a pattern or practice case against the Springfield, Massachusetts Police Department about a unit in there and their pattern or practice of using excessive force. So I have never suggested that pattern or practice cases that look at at particular institutions are off the table. I've always said we will consider them where we think it'll be the most effective tool at getting the kind of changes we want to see. The other tool are more collaborative kinds of relationships and work with the police department that don't necessarily involve bringing judges and the court into the process, but are more bilateral negotiations and setting of benchmarks and working collaboratively with the police. I think the former mayor of Chicago basically said that, I think he's right, that reform is not something that you do to police, it's something you do with police. But let me say the police the leadership of our police, generally speaking in this country, understand that, and they are very advanced in their thinking, and I think are doing a great job trying to lead law enforcement to deal with the kinds of problems that we're seeing today.
Is there anything that you specifically learned from the law enforcement agencies here in the state that you're going to take back with you to Washington, maybe best practices and so on and so forth?
Yes. I learned some things like that, some positive aspects of what is being done here in Arkansas, for example, on certification, the maintaining of the database on people who are required to leave particular forces and so forth. So there's those elements. They also raised a number of things that are deterring people from going in or spending long careers in law enforcement, some of the problems that are confronting law enforcement officials and the cops in their normal life. So some of those are areas we're going to take up. One of the things that is important is the wellness of law enforcement officers. People overlook this, and they think a lot about the impact of a war on our military, but people have given short shrift to the impact of dealing with crime and the violence and the carnage that has on our police officers, and suicide rates among police officers are very high. And so one of the areas we want to focus on are programs that protect the health and wellness of our law enforcement officers, and I think a lot of work is being done here on that. Yes? Well, as I understand it, and I haven't had a chance to look at the opinion and study the issue, but it should not affect previous federal convictions, but it could affect state convictions, and some of those cases will have to be redone in the federal courts.
The federal government has a crime statute for different use disposal in prosecuting cases. The governor has talked about trying to get legislation passed in this state. Any advice or ideas on the direction that should head?
Yes, I mean, I support hate crimes. Originally, maybe 30 years ago when I was Attorney General before, I was skeptical of them because I felt in some ways that any violent crime is a hate crime. But I now see their utility and have been supporting them. And in fact, this administration has sort of set records in the area of prosecuting hate crimes. So I do support hate crime legislation generally, and obviously it's a question for the people of Arkansas if they want a state law, but we certainly find our federal laws to be useful.
It didn't, but I wish I had talked about it because we do support that. We hope that we can do that in next session of the legislature.
When it comes to funding police and agencies, is there anything currently being talked about in terms of getting that funding, and especially too, I would assume more of the rural parts of the country, being that they're pretty strapped when it comes to that as it is?
Yeah, well, first I just want to say that for those who would like to improve police practices, help the police better do their job to protect public safety, defunding the police is a insane counterproductive idea. As the Attorney General mentioned, any organization that's facing constrained budgets will tend to cut things like training first. And many of the skills a police officer needs are not easy. They don't come naturally. It's not something that you can just kind of pick up on the job. It does take time for training. And that's true not just of the police, it's true of our military, it's probably true of media organizations. When an organization faces constrained budgets, training is often the very first thing to go. So if anything, if we want to give our police the tools to maintain public safety and maintain the confidence of our people, we should be increasing law enforcement budgets. And we heard that consistently this morning from rural police chiefs and sheriffs up to those who are working here at the state level. Now, in terms of rural positions in particular, I think we should consider the way we allocate federal funds and whether or not adding one or two cops on the or one or two sheriff's deputies on the margin in a place like Monroe County versus Pulaski County can have a bigger impact on public safety in those areas where you might only have 4 or 5 police officers or a dozen sheriff's deputies or so forth. The final thing I'd say is if Congress passes new legislation related to the coronavirus later this month or early August, I think it's something that we should consider as well. State and local budgets have been strained to a degree, and that means that law enforcement budgets and other first responder budgets have been strained as well. That may not mean new money necessarily. It may mean giving more flexibility to our governors and to our county judges and to our mayors to use that money where their community needs it, and each community is going to be somewhat different.
Jay, I would add, starting with that last point, that under the CARES Act, each state the size of Arkansas got $1.25 billion, and the governor has said that he's somewhat constrained in how to use that money. I think Congress should amend that bill and give the states more direction, which could include supporting those law enforcement agencies that are under most stress, which would be states with counties with higher sales tax losses, rural counties. And so I do support that. Secretary Mnuchin, our Treasury Secretary, though, did confirm to Congress and to the governors he didn't expect to see any EMS, any fire, or any police officer laid off due to COVID, and that the money could be used for that purpose in the states. On this other point, though, about recruiting and training, it's so important. That's why defund the police is a meaningless slogan. That in fact, to have a better, more community-based policing system, you need more training, more engagement. And what the Attorney General heard today is what a good job that we do generally in the state on that. Training, the law enforcement academies, the certification, the removal of bad cops, and that their record travels with them in that record database here in our state. So I think that's important. But you have to understand, for those who've called for a complete elimination of qualified immunity for public officials performing a law enforcement role, that's a bad idea. It hurts recruiting. How do we fill the baby boom retirement jobs in all of our occupations, but much less in the dangerous occupation in law enforcement? Every morning, 800,000 people, men and women, dressed in a blue uniform, kiss their families goodbye and go out and help protect our communities. And when they don't have any protection for doing the job they do with the right training and skills that they have, you're going to hurt recruiting and you're going to have more retirements, which is what we're seeing across the country. So we need to support our law enforcement agencies with the proper funding, the proper training, the proper rules of engagement. And I think Arkansas actually is a very keen place to see how to do that and do it in the right way.
Is there one final question?
Mr. Attorney General, you talked today about arrests that have been made, I think 150 of them. Can you talk about that? Have there been any in Arkansas, and how big a threat is this Boogaloo movement that you mentioned?
Yes, we've been responding to the rioting. As the senator said, what happened in these demonstrations where they were quickly, many of them in many cities, were hijacked by professional agitators who tried to whip up the demonstrators and use violence. And we've been addressing that through our joint terrorism task forces, which are throughout the country and run by the FBI, but are tied in very closely to our state and local partners to share intelligence and information and go after the people that we think are ringleaders behind this violence. And nationwide, there have been over 150 arrests. I actually can't tell you. I don't believe there were any in Arkansas, but I can't say that for sure. And we have over 500 investigations underway right now. Oh, Boogaloo. You know, there are a number of different groups. I've said publicly before, it's sort of a witch's brew of extremists. I would say, you know, most of the extremist groups we see tend to be on the, you know, of anarchistic stripe or, you know, far left. There were a number that just seem to be pure anarchical groups that just want to tear the government down and rebuild something, and you can take your pick of whatever it is. Boogaloo seems to be one of these anarchistic groups. It's hard to otherwise pigeonhole, but they have popped up here and there. Not as much, as far as I can tell, as groups that look more like Antifa or operate more like Antifa, but there's clearly Boogaloo members that have been involved in this. Okay. Okay, thank you.